Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and another tutorial. Today I am super pleased to introduce you to a newer designer. Her name is Andrea with Inaliti Designs. This is the pattern that I have done a tutorial for. This is called the Luna Drawstring Tote. There are two sizes. This is the tote size that I have done here. There's also a handbag size. This is an amazing pattern. I must say, her pattern is one of the best written patterns I think I have ever done. There's a lot of great patterns out there, but this one was just written so flawlessly. Definitely check her out. I will make sure I put a link down below to where you can purchase this pattern. She does have a couple others that you could check out. I know I definitely will be. Let me show you some of the features of this bag. So it can be done in canvases, it can be done in cottons, it can be done in all vinyls like I have done here. It is domestic machine friendly. Again, that's all based on what you choose. I mean, for doing all vinyls, there were some thick seams, but I have an industrial and I knew it could handle that. Very little interfacing in this bag. I used a canvas lining, so I didn't have to line it if you're using, or I didn't have to interface it. If you're using a cotton lining, make sure you use a woven interfacing on all those pieces. The vinyl in this is not interfaced at all. There is some Decovil Heavy in the bottom, and in the connectors there's some Decovil Lite to help just have a little extra security where the rivets are. Yeah, it is a crossbody bag with a two-toned strap. I had never made rope before. It was so much fun. And on the inside, now this is a drop-in lining finish. Super easy to do. This one is a drop-in lining on even a domestic or a flatbed machine because it is such a wide opening on top. And look how flawlessly, like, the lining does not sag at all. It is amazing. So you got your two slip pockets, plus there's a little slip pocket in there for a pen. You have a decorative zipper pocket. I mean, look at that. It's perfect. By the way, that lining there, that is designed on Spoonflower by Chris McNaught of Needle and Anchor. She's got some amazing designs on Spoonflower. Anyways, I learned a lot with this bag. I'm usually not a grommet person, but it worked okay. I am not scared of the grommets anymore. I did ask Andrea to write me a little bit of a biography so we could get to know her better. I am going to read that to you now. So Andrea Sachet, I hope I said her name right. Born and raised in Namibia on a farm, I moved to Cape Town, South Africa to study. I studied interior design. I am also a registered AutoCAD technician and worked for about 14 years in the civil and structural engineering field. I'm married and had two boys, 22 years and 10 years old. I am in the process of divorcing, unfortunately. I now live with my youngest in the picturesque village Bredasdorp, I hope I'm saying these right, on the garden route of Western Cape Province in South Africa. I stumbled onto sewing after a miscarriage in 2003. So sorry about that, Andrea. I started with making clothes and I am completely self-taught. Pattern grading is actually quite hard. I ventured into quilting and finally discovered bag patterns in 2018, and the bug hit me hard, just like all of us. I have always been artistic and very technical minded, so it was not long before I started hacking patterns by well-known natter designers Swoon, Blucala, and Bagstock. Therefore, designing my own patterns happened naturally. I released my first pattern, the Beach Tote, on my birthday in August 2020. Fast forward till today, my most downloaded pattern is the Zanelle, a free pattern, and I'm about to release my 7th pattern, the Luna Drawstring, which is this one. Right from the onset, my aim has always been to design patterns that can be sewn on a domestic machine. I test and design all my patterns on my trusty Singer HD 4452. I want even the occasional sewer to be able to produce beautiful bags, as I found earlier on in my bag making journey that most designers don't consider the fact that not everyone has an industrial machine or can afford one. This is so true. My biggest wish is to inspire novice as well as seasoned bag makers, and I try to incorporate clever construction techniques in my patterns. And this is me in a nutshell. That is Andrea. Again, her pattern is written so well, and it definitely is domestic machine friendly, and I really do hope that you guys all check it out. Anyways, without further ado, let's get to making this bag. I also forgot to mention in the intro, my vinyl. This is the Cotton Candy Pink vinyl from Galaxy Customs. This is the Canada Goose vinyl from Galaxy Customs for Canuck line. I already mentioned my lining. My matte black hardware is from Serial Bag Makers. And that's it. Okay, now we can go make this bag.
We're going to need rivets, number 5 zipper tape, 2 zipper ends, number 5 zipper pull, 2 swivel clasps, optional strap ends, purse feet, your bag tags, a slider, 2 D-rings, and 12 grommets. You're also going to need 2 pieces of a Decovil Heavy or Decovil Lite measuring 2 by 3.5 inches. You're going to need your slip pocket and your interior zipper pocket overlays, your bottom panel with Decovil Heavy outside of the seam allowances, your zipper lining, your lining slip pocket piece, your 2 main lining panels, your 2 main body pieces, your 2 bottom pieces, exterior bottom pieces, 2 lining top panels and 2 exterior top panels, two connector pieces backed with Decovil Lite, your stop piece and your Decovil Lite stabilizer piece for your stop, your cord piece, and your 2 lengths of vinyl for your double-sided crossbody strap. So I'm going to go ahead and make my dual colored strap off camera, and I will put that class down in the description below. Okay, now we are going to make our cording. So you're going to take your piece with a center line marked in the middle. Start in the middle, folding the bottom raw edge into the center. Starting in the middle will help this long piece not to twist. So once you've done one side, go back to the middle and do the other side. If you don't want to use double-sided tape, you can definitely go ahead and use clips here instead. Do the exact same thing with the other side. You want to leave about 1/8 of an inch gap in between the 2 raw edges here, and it'll just help it fold over a little bit easier. Okay, so now that is done, you are going to go ahead and fold the folded sides into one another. So you're folding it in half again and clipping it in place. Now we're going to go ahead and right down the middle of this, we're going to top stitch all the way down to hold it in place. Once this is done, you can go ahead and set this aside for now. Okay, now we're going to work on our connector pieces. So I have fused my Decovil Lite onto the back of my stop and my 2 connector pieces. I'm going to take my pattern pieces and just punch holes where the rivet placements are on the pattern piece. Put it on the back and mark where I need to put my rivets. Go ahead and punch your rivet holes like so. Do the same for the other 2 connectors. Okay, so now to form our connectors, you're going to take some double-sided tape and put it along the long edges like so. A little bit across the middle like so. The 2 bottom end cutouts you're going to fold in. And then the long edges, you're going to fold those in. You're using your Decovil Lite piece as your guide to folding. So you're folding it right along that Decovil Lite piece. You will notice it does not cover up the rivet holes. That's what we want. And then finally, a little bit more double-sided tape to fold in that last point at the very bottom there. Then we're going to take this stop and we're going to top stitch all the way around with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you can set that aside for now as well. Okay, so you're going to do the exact same process with the 2 side connector pieces, starting with the 2 left and right at the bottom there, into the center, again folding it right along that Decovil Lite piece, then your long edges, and then finally the very, very bottom point there. Okay, and now there's little lines on the pattern piece here, and there's stitching stop lines because we are not going to stitch all the way around this just yet. We're only going to top stitch part of it. So I am just making those marks from my pattern piece to this piece, and we're just going to stitch down to those lines. So at the raw edge you can back stitch, but when you get to that marking we just made, put your needle down on that mark, do not back stitch, pull your threads long, tug on the bobbin thread to pull that top thread through, and then tie that in 3 or 4 knots. What this does is make it so we don't have a thick part of thread where our back stitching is, so we can continue on with a nice fluid line later on. Now for the other side, I have to start at where we drew the line, so I'm pulling my threads long. I am not going to back stitch here. Stitch through to the short raw edge, back stitch there. Go ahead and pull that bobbin thread again to pull up the top thread, pull it through, then tie it off. You will do the exact same thing with the other connector. Okay, so now we're going to take our main exterior pieces, and we're going to do some markings on the back. So we are going to draw on the long sides here our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. This is going to make it a lot easier when we go to stitch this in place, because we'll follow those as our seam allowance guidelines. We also want to find our centers. You can use the pattern piece to do this again. Draw a line connecting our top and bottom center. And take a look at your pattern piece. I'm going to punch through my pattern piece where my rivets are going to go. And on the back side of the main panel, approximately where those rivets are going to go, I'm going to go ahead and fuse my piece of Decovil Lite or Decovil Heavy. I am using Decovil Heavy. Okay, so that is done. So I'm going to put my pattern piece over top and mark where my rivet placement is going to be. And it should fall right in the center of that Decovil Lite or Decovil Heavy piece. And I'm going to go ahead and I am going to punch those rivet holes. Now you are going to notice that those rivet holes and the ones in our side connectors do not look like they match up. That is okay. Trust the process. You will see that these will end up matching up perfectly once we are ready to put them together. So if you don't think they match up, that is okay. Now you're going to take your D-ring and you're going to slip it over the raw edge side of the connector. Center it to the top of the main panel, and then you're going to just base this in place with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You'll do the same with the other side. Okay, so now that that's done, we are going to prepare our top panels. So I'm going ahead and I'm just punching holes in where my grommet placement is going to be. You're going to want to use a quilting pencil, something that you can wash away but is not going to end up rubbing away as we do this, as we will not be installing the grommets till the very last step. But you do at this point want to mark where your grommet centers are going to be. And you'll do that on both pieces. Now on the back of these, you want to mark your top and your bottom. You do not want to get them confused. Along the bottom side of both of these, you're going to draw your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And on the top, you are going to draw a 1-inch seam allowance. And this is going to be our fold line for when we go to do the drop-in lining. So you want to make sure you know which one is top and which one is bottom for sure. Okay, go ahead and mark your centers using your pattern piece. Draw a line for that center. And do the same with the other side. Now we're going to take this with our panel pieces, make sure the bottom of the top lining or the top piece is what is going face down, right sides together with our main panel piece. And as we've drawn that 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we are just going to use that as our guide for sewing these two panels together. Now once that is done, you want your seam allowance to be pointing to the bottom of the bag. So I'm just using some double-sided tape to hold this in place for me. You can go ahead and finger press this. If you've used cotton, you can definitely take it to the iron and give it a good press. Just make sure that that seam allowance is pointing down, and make sure that your connector piece is up and out of the way. We're going to go ahead and top stitch to hold that seam in place through the main body panel here. You would do the exact same thing with the other main panel. Okay, so now that that's done, now I want to reduce some of this bulk in these corners because this is going to be a thick seam when we go to put it together. So I'm not cutting into my stitching, I'm just trimming some of that seam allowance away at an angle right at that seam. Okay, now the back side, put in your 2 rivets, not setting them, just so the posts are through, and this is going to help us place our connector piece. Use a little bit of double-sided tape outside of the seam allowance on the back of the connector piece. Make sure you are not covering up the rivet holes either. And then you're going to match those rivets, the bottom one and the top one, and put them through, and then press down that tape for the placement of the connector. You can now remove those rivets. We're going to go ahead starting where our stitching had stopped and started, and we are going to go ahead and stitch that down. So I'm pulling my threads long. I'm going to make sure my needle goes down where the stitching had stopped in our previous stitching we did earlier. Do not backstitch. Pull those threads long and top stitch all the way around with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, your double-sided tape was outside of this 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, so you shouldn't have any issues with it gumming up your needle. Now before you go up the other side, put your needle down. Never mind. Go ahead and make sure your needle ends in the stitch from before. Again, do not backstitch. Pull your threads long and go ahead, tug on that bobbin thread, pull that top thread through and tie it off on both sides. And that'll give us a nice continuous top stitch without any backstitching. You'll repeat the exact same thing with the other panel. Okay, so now that that's all done, we can go ahead and set our rivets now. So go ahead and put your rivets through. I'm actually going to put another little piece of scraps of Decovil Heavy on the back just to make sure that those rivets are going to be good and secure. And then go ahead and set those rivets. Okay, so now we're going to work on our bottom panels. So again, on the top and the bottom of these bottom panels, you're going to go ahead and mark your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on both of the long sides. And then similar to how we did the top panel, we are going to do the same on the bottom panel. Put them right sides together, and using that line we just drew as our seam allowance guideline. And once again, we want our seam to be pointing towards the bottom of the bag. So I'm going to go ahead and use my double-sided tape again. Press this, finger press this, whatever your machine can handle. And press that seam nice and taut, pointing towards the bottom of the bag, and go ahead and top stitch through that bottom panel. Okay, so now that that's done, I did the same thing and trimmed away those joining seams just a smidgen. On each of the left and right sides of the main panels, again, mark your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're going to put these right sides together. You want to match up where the seams are so we have a nice continuous line at the joins, especially if you are using dual colors like I am. Same with on the top. Make sure it's nice and continuous, and once you have those clipped into place, go ahead and clip the rest of that side. Okay, now we're going to take this to the machine and use that 3/8 of an inch line we drew as our guide to sew this side together. The joining seams may be a little bit thick here depending on your machine, so have your hump jumper ready. I was okay, but I am on an industrial machine. Now what we want to do is we want to press that seam flat. So again, I'm going to use my double-sided tape. You can go ahead and finger press this if you don't want to do that, or if, depending on what you have made the bag with, you can also go ahead and take it to the iron and press it. So butterfly that seam out. And then we are going to go ahead and top stitch down each side of that seam to hold those seams in place. Now, as you're about to see what I've learned here, before you start this top stitching process, make sure that you're going in with a full bobbin, because about halfway down, I ran out of bobbin thread, and I have to go over it hoping that I can get into those same needle holes as I did the first time around. Okay, so that's all fixed. I've got that going. So you're going to go ahead and clip the two short edges together and stitching down there just like we did before, and putting that seam open, and you'll see we have created a tube now once that stitching is done. Now we're going to top stitch this through the tube. Do not be scared of this. The opening of this bag is really big, so it's really easy to top stitch in the tube like I'm doing here. So you can just see I'm kind of pulling the top layer away and just following that seam down through the tube. Now when I get to the end of this first side, I'm going to make sure my needle is down. I'm going to turn the bag, do a couple stitches over, turn the bag again, and then go down the other side of the seam. Just make sure it's laying nice and flat so you don't get any nips or tucks in there. Now we are going to go ahead and install our purse feet. So again, you're going to use your pattern piece as a guide where the purse feet placement is going to be. I am also going to add a purse feet right in the middle here, mainly because my purse feet have come in a set of 5. Also go ahead and mark your centers on all 4 sides using your pattern piece as your guide. And install your purse feet. If you need a class on that, I have that down below. I also turned my bag out to decide which seam I liked the best to choose for my front side, and then I went ahead and I installed my nameplate. Turn it wrong side out again, and now we are going to install the bottom of the bag. Now, the long side of the bottom, you're going to match up with one of those center seams. Make sure you have it positioned the right way. The seams that we had just sewn in that tube, that is the front and the back of our bag. Match up the center with the seam on the other long side. And match up our center lines on the 2 short sides. Once you have all that in place, you can go ahead and distribute the fabric evenly all the way around. I did not have to put any clips or anything to make this fit. The pattern is made for it to fit, but if you're finding it isn't fitting, go ahead and put just a few snips, not in the bottom of the bag, but in the main panel of the bag at only about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but you should not need to do any snips. Make sure you use a lot of clips around those corners. You could also hand baste this if you wanted to, or you could go ahead and staple it if you like that method. I'm just going to use a million clips as I'm doing here. Take this to the machine and go all the way around with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Take this nice and slow, especially when you get to the corners. Doing an oval or circular bottom, I mean, isn't my easiest feat to master. I'm not a master by any means. So just take it slow. Make sure all puckers are spread out. Adjust accordingly with your needle down whenever you need to go around that corner. Make sure you're catching both layers. You can see this video is actually in fast motion and it's not going very fast. That is how slow I am sewing around these curves right now. We're on the last corner, almost done. This part is the hardest part of making this bag, I find, but it's really not that hard. Just making sure everything is nice and even as you go around those corners with no puckers. Okay, now you can go ahead and you can turn this right side out. Make sure your seam is good. Push out all along the seam so you have nice and tight curves. Make sure everything was caught. And I cut everything. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to prep this for our drop-in lining next. So along that 1-inch line that we drew along the top of the top panel, we're going to go ahead and put some double-sided tape right along there. If you're using a domestic machine, make sure you use much thinner double-sided tape than I'm using here. If you can find 1/8 to 1/4, that would be ideal, so it'll stay out of your seam allowance. You're going to pull that tape away and fold the raw edges down towards that line and stick it in place. And do that all the way around. Okay, so now we are going to prep our lining pieces as our exterior is done. So I'm taking my lining binding and I'm putting some double-sided tape on here. Again, keep the double-sided tape outside of the seam allowances you'll be sewing if you are on a domestic machine. You're going to line. Okay, I had folded my slip pocket in half, wrong sides together. My raw edge is going to the center line of our slip pocket binding. You're going to see my slip pocket is longer than the binding. I just cut it too long. I'll trim that up later. Then go ahead and fold the binding accent piece over top, like so. So you're enclosing that raw seam. I like to use just a few crocodile clips or alligator clips to hold that in place, because it ends up being a little bit puffy the way I did it. So this kind of makes it nice and flat. And we're going to go ahead and we are going to top stitch. So my first top stitching I am doing along the raw edge of that decorative piece. Or I am doing it opposite than what I'm saying, and I am top stitching that folded piece first, and then I'm going to go back in and do along that raw edge. You can do it either way. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and trim my slip pocket piece to be the same length as that decorative accent piece. Now this should fit lengthwise with your lining panel. Fold your slip pocket in half to find the center. Give it a good finger press. Do the same with your lining panel. I'm also going to go ahead and just make a snip of my center of the top of my lining panel, and then just kind of do a good finger press. Now for our slip pocket placement, that's hard to say, we do have a line on our pattern piece, so I'm just going to fold on that line on my pattern piece, line up the top edge of the pattern piece with my lining piece, and take my invisible ink pen and just draw a line where we will be putting that slip pocket piece. So it's going to be going there. I like to take a little bit of double-sided tape along the bottom of the slip pocket piece to hold it in place when I put it on my lining panel. You can also use pins. So I'm going to line that fold on the bottom up at that line that we just drew. Our slip pocket piece should be almost the same size as our lining piece. If it's longer, you can trim it up. If it's shorter, you have to redo it. I'm also going to draw a line with my invisible pen down the center of that slip pocket piece, and then 1 inch to the right, I'm going to draw another line. We're going to go ahead and baste down the two short edges, top stitch around the bottom, and then go ahead and do our top stitching down the pen pocket. So once you have the sides and the bottom done, I'm going to pull my threads long again, starting at the bottom of the center line, put my needle down. I'm not going to backstitch. I'm just going to stitch all the way up to where I almost hit the accent piece, put my needle down, pull my threads long again, cut them, and then we're going to go ahead and pull our bobbin thread to pull the top thread through, just like we have done in the past, and tie them off. And then you're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing with that other line that we drew 1 inch to the right of the center line. Okay, so I'm not going to do the zipper pocket on in the video. You're going to put it 2 3/8 of an inch down. If you need a class on this, I do have that down below in the description. Okay, so now we're going to take our lining top panels. These are very similar to our exterior top panels, but a little bit different. On the bottom, you're going to draw a 3/8 of an inch line. And then on the top, you are going to draw a 1-inch line, just like we did with the exterior. The 3/8 of an inch line is our bottom and the 1 inch is our top. Okay, so I put some rivets into my slip pocket for a little decoration, a little stability for that pen pocket. I'm going to take one of my top lining panels, line up the bottom of that right sides together with the top of my main lining panel, exactly like how we did with our main pieces here. You're going to go ahead and use that 3/8 line as a guide and stitch those together. Do the same with the other side. Okay, just like we did with our main panel, we want to have that seam pointing towards the bottom of the bag like so, and then you're going to go ahead and top stitch that in place through the lining. Rinse and repeat with the other side. Okay, so now we are going to work on our dart. So you're going to take each dart and fold that slit right sides together and then stitch down there with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance for all of the darts on both panels. So here's our first dart. I have it folded right at that slit, sewing with the 3/8. Move to the next one, connect the raw edges, and sew with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you will do that with the other 6 darts. Okay, so now we need to put these together. So the first thing we're going to do is match the seams of our darts of both of the panels, and you're going to nest them together. So one seam will be going to the left, one seam will be going to the right. That'll help reduce some of the bulk in the bottom. Do that with all 4 sets of darts. And then next you're going to go where our join is for our lining top panels and our main lining panels and line up that seam nice, so we will have a nice continuous line at that seam where our vinyl meets our lining piece. And then go ahead and clip the rest in place, distributing that fabric evenly between all of those points. Okay, now we're going to sew all the way around there with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now what we want to do is the seams just at the top here, we want to butterfly that seam out or lay them flat. So you're going to use a little bit of double-sided tape to do that. And that's just going to reduce the bulk when we go to do our drop-in lining. Okay, so just as we did with the exterior, you are going to put some double-sided tape along that 1-inch line and fold the long edges down to that line like the exterior. Okay, so now we have completed exterior and completed lining. Situate your lining how you want it to go in the bag. I like my zipper pocket at the back, so I've made sure I've put it there. We're going to first match up our side seams here and clip them in place. This way we know we have our lining centered. Do the other side, matching up those centers, or the seam with the center. Pull this nice and taut to distribute that fabric for the front side or the back side, the long side of one of the long sides. Clip it in the middle, distribute that fabric evenly all the way to the other side so your folded edges are nice and even with one another. Do the same with the other center long side. And then go ahead and clip it around the rest of the way. So that's our lining and our exterior, wrong sides together, exactly how it would appear if it were sewn. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this to my long arm. This is very easy to do on a flatbed as well. You would do it the same way. You just wouldn't be going around the cylinder arm. It would kind of be up and you'd have the seam flat. So go ahead and sew all the way around there with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that that's done, now the scary part of putting in those grommets. So I'm going to use some manual punches and these grommets here, and I have some installation tools for my grommets. You want to find the punch that is slightly smaller than your grommet opening. Go ahead and use a cutting board in between one of the layers and punch all of your holes using the markings that we had marked at the very beginning as the center of our grommet holes. Go ahead and install your grommets like I have done here as per your manufacturer's instructions. You're going to take your drawstring, and on the back of the bag you're going to put one side from the outside to the center and the other one same thing like this. Make it nice and even and go ahead and weave each side through to the front of the bag. Make sure that it is not twisted. And now it's time to install our stop. So how we're going to do that is you're going to take your stop wrong side up. You're going to fold it over the left side, put a clip to hold that, fold it over the right side. And what we want to do is match up those 3 rivet holes. So I'm taking a rivet, putting it through the first 2 holes, and then through the 3rd hole, getting it through all the layers. And then go ahead and set that rivet. Lastly, all you have to do now is put on your zipper ends on the end of your drawstring. And we're done.
All right, that's it. That's all. What did you guys think? It is such an amazing pattern. I mean, it's so good. I hope you guys all make them. I hope that you will post your makes on my bag makers community. That link is down below. And I hope that this tutorial was helpful. Anyways, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. And if you'd like to support my channel further, you can buy me a coffee. That link is down below in the description as well. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.